It began as a stain on the stars. At first, astronomers thought it a lens flare or stray debris. The object moved against orbital logic, too controlled to be a meteor, too slow to be natural, and utterly silent. No entry heat. No atmospheric ripple. It simply slid downward, a black mass against the thinning dawn. By 4:13 a.m., it was hovering over Washington, D.C. Not above it like a threat, but precisely centered. As if it had rehearsed the position 1,000 times. Police sirens howled before anyone understood what they were reacting to. Thousands of phone cameras caught footage, live-streamed to millions who stared from their beds, their buses, their coffee queues. The sky had cracked and out of it came geometry. The thing, some described it as a colossal insect husk, others a tombstone fallen from orbit, hung just above the National Mall, casting an uneven ellipse across monuments and manicured lawns. Its surface looked aged, as though peeled from ancient seafloor wreckage, pale and grooved with rows of pulsing indentations. No propulsion. No fire. Just a hovering mass, massive enough to bend light ever so slightly at the edges. Military jets reached it in under 10 minutes. They circled once, then held position. The object's structure disrupted radar without aggression, like a stone refusing to be seen by mirrors. When a stealth drone tried to approach, its camera feeds turned to static, then a soft white. Still the object made no move. At 5:01 a.m., a sound, if it could be called that, washed across every device capable of output. It bypassed antennas and screens. It hijacked shortwave and Wi-Fi alike. The voice came not with emotion but with clarity. Species designation, Homo sapiens. Social hierarchy observed. Communication initiated. Interface pending. In the Situation Room, President Halvorsen stood without speaking. Her chief of staff was already white-knuckled at the table's edge, flicking glances at the Pentagon liaison whose lips barely moved as he whispered into his earpiece. The message repeated every 60 seconds for 7 cycles. Each iteration was identical, no alteration in tone, rhythm, or syntax. By the 8th time, the military had officially stood down all offensive options. At 6:34 a.m. movement. Not from the sky but from the earth. The lawn beneath the hovering object shivered. Tourists had long since been evacuated, leaving only surveillance drones and scattered trash caught in eddies. A slow, rising dome of fibrous material pushed upward. Where there had been grass, there was now something growing, building, as though the soil itself had been rewritten. First came the rootstocks, pale and tubular like segmented pillars of cartilage. Then membranes formed between them, webbing out and solidifying into floors, terraces, and strange protrusions. The entire growth took on the rough shape of a tower, but it pulsed, faintly, as though breathing. By midday the thing was 4 stories tall and still expanding. On news channels, it was dubbed the embassy before anyone could stop to consider whether that word still meant what they thought it did. "We're being invited," said the Secretary of External Affairs, not hiding the irony in his voice. Or maybe, harvested. Halvorsen didn't respond. Outside, the alien structure cast a long, jittering shadow across the reflecting pool, like it had grown tired of waiting. By morning's end, the structure had stopped growing. It stood 12 meters tall, wider than the Smithsonian's castle, and entirely alien. It looked less constructed than exhaled, not shaped by hand, but by something that understood matter differently. The outer shell undulated in slow waves, almost imperceptible, like it was adjusting to Earth's atmosphere. No visible doors. No windows. Just a single tapering ramp descending toward the lawn, ending in what looked like a glossy disc made of interwoven bone and glass. The crowd outside the barricades had swelled despite orders to stay home. They stood pressed against fencing, whispering and filming with numb fingers. News anchors recited official statements. Experts speculated endlessly. Priests prayed on loudspeakers. Children were kept indoors. The military kept its distance. At 9:06 a.m. the disc lit up. Not with light exactly. The surface reconfigured, lines of translucent material folded into shifting concentric circles. Then with no ceremony or sound, a shape emerged. It unfolded from the disk like a statue separating from liquid marble. 2 limbs forward, 2 behind, and a long neck arching backward before flicking forward again. Its body was narrow and jointed in too many places but upright. A plate of fibrous material covered its midsection, flexing and relaxing in sync with its movement. Each footfall left the disk rippling for seconds. It walked to the edge of the ramp, then stopped. A moment later it spoke without opening a mouth, without visible tech. Language acquired. Response expected. The voice didn't come from speakers. It materialized in the minds of every person within a kilometer. Not painful. Not loud. Just present, like an idea someone else was thinking for you. In the control tent nearby, Ambassador Rhys McCallan removed his earpiece and rubbed his jaw. "This is your show now," someone said behind him. Rhys stepped forward through the plastic flap and descended the short staircase toward the quarantine line. His suit was pressed, his face calm, but he walked like a man pacing on frozen lake ice, calculated and aware that one misstep might crack everything. He reached the perimeter marked with radiant blue rods placed by the response team. He did not cross. The alien did not move. "I am Rhys McCallan," he said, keeping his voice even. "I've been appointed to make first contact. This is what you call diplomacy. I'm listening." The creature tilted its head sideways, joints bending the wrong way. "Not diplomacy. Coordination." McCallan frowned. "Coordination of what?" "Supply chain. Habitat registration. Atmospheric permissions. Processing rights." He blinked. "You want land rights?" The alien paused, at least that's what it seemed like. Then it turned, gesturing toward the structure behind it. "Embassy established. Processing begins once quotas are confirmed." "Quotas of what?" Silence. And then a slow blink of light rippled across the structure's outer surface. Dozens of pulsing flashes, aligned like code. Inside the Pentagon's mobile command center, language analysts were already decoding the transmission. It wasn't until one linguist in her 3rd hour without coffee finally cracked the numeric sequence that the room went cold. The list wasn't coordinates. It was biological. Human categories. By blood type. By age. By metabolic variants. They weren't ambassadors. They were livestock. Outside, Rhys stood very still. The alien had not moved. The silence stretched again. "Compliance ensures preference. Your species will be cultivated. With care." He didn't speak. He didn't move. He only stared, while across the street, beneath layers of flashing headlines, the realization started to take root. This embassy wasn't here to negotiate. It was here to harvest. The phrasing was brushed off at first: cultivation, processing rights, compliance ensures preference. To the untrained ear, it all sounded bureaucratic, even friendly. But as transcripts circulated, analysts began noticing the lack of metaphor. The aliens spoke like logistics managers, not diplomats. Every word was selected for efficiency, not comfort. Still, world governments spun the event for public calm. By the end of the week, the alien visitors had made 5 more public appearances. Each time, a single representative would step onto the ramp, issue instructions or requests, then recede into the tower. They never gave names. Never described their species. They simply referred to themselves as coordinators. Their requests became more specific. They asked for access to medical databases, then birth records, then migration data. Every ask came framed as part of a biosustainability study. When they began requesting live verification samples, the language became harder to obscure. Initially, those samples were described as volunteers. According to press briefings, 15 individuals across various nations agreed to cross-species biomedical exchange. Their faces were never released. Their families stopped returning messages. A week later, 20 more were collected. Then 60. By the 3rd week, that number had reached over 200 across 10 countries. Then came the supply ratings. Without announcement, citizens began receiving messages on their phones and email, phrased like credit scores, except these were tied to the alien registry. A color-coded scale from green to red. No explanation. No appeal process. Just a number and a classification. Premium, acceptable, variable, excess. People panicked. Rhys McCallum was no longer giving interviews. His staff handled the few remaining press appearances, offering vague promises of ongoing dialogue and advancing human understanding. Behind the scenes, he'd stopped sleeping. Most of his meetings now took place inside a secured soundproof trailer 2 blocks from the embassy's perimeter. "Look at this," said Colonel Veers, shoving a printed photo across the table. Rhys squinted at the grainy image. It showed a young woman stepping onto the alien ramp under guard escort. Nothing unusual, except the faint translucence along her arms and neck. Beneath her skin something moved. Her name was Malazar. Went in last Tuesday from the Oslo group. That photo's from yesterday. Could be a light refraction. Veers snorted. "You think I dragged a 2-star clearance file through half the Atlantic for a refraction?" Rhys leaned back, rubbing his temple. "What happened to her? She's not listed anywhere anymore. Not on your side, not on ours. She was tagged processed. No context." Outside, the alien tower released a brief wave of static pulses, an alert pattern the coordinators used to announce their readiness for communication. The air vibrated faintly. Veers leaned in. "This isn't research. It's inventory control." They sat in silence, listening to the faint thrum echoing through the steel walls of the trailer. Later that night, reports emerged from Kansas. A small town had been evacuated under the guise of gas line failures. Locals claimed drones were seen lifting shipping containers into the sky. Power outages followed. Cell towers went dark. By morning, the town's name had been wiped from local registries. In its place, satellite imagery showed a large, domed facility where farmland had once been. No one knew what it was. Official maps labeled it as a geological survey zone. Unofficially, a new term began to circulate across encrypted networks, whispered in back rooms and message boards. Feed farm. And Earth's first one, it seemed, was already operational. It started quietly, just a line added to government health screenings. A new biometric field. A DNA sample swabbed, to verify species compatibility with atmospheric adaptation goals. The coordinators had phrased it plainly, without drama. As always, they answered no questions. But the implications unfolded fast. Blood drives were digitized. Census updates suddenly required saliva. Hospitals were instructed to route routine patient samples to global biointegration archives. The paperwork was a maze, no single department oversaw it. It all passed through temporary agencies with unclear mandates and ever-changing names. Most didn't notice. Until the rankings arrived. Each person tested began receiving letters, sometimes emails, marked selection status. Pending. Below the boldface was a simple code, 4 digits followed by a single letter. Color-coded again like before. Green meant you were categorized as nutrient stable. Yellow, potential variant. Red. Harvest ready. People started disappearing in the middle of the night. At first, families believed the recipients had gone into hiding. But neighbors swore there were no packed bags, no vehicle movement, no farewells. Just sudden absences, and occasional surveillance drones hovering near rooftops in the days prior. Entire zip codes turned gray on public transit maps. Rural towns were hardest hit. They lacked the infrastructure to question authority. When agents arrived in black transports bearing both human insignia and alien glyphs, people obeyed. Some still thought the selection was for off-world diplomatic programs. Others guessed the truth but had nowhere to run. In Minnesota, a teacher named Byron Griggs live-streamed his detainment. He'd received a yellow code but had refused testing. The footage showed him arguing with 3 agents in full-body respirators. Behind them, a black crawler sat idling, its cargo doors open. Griggs was dragged off camera mid-sentence. The stream cut out moments later. The entire video was scrubbed within hours. The resistance didn't start with protests. It began with small acts. Lab techs switching vials, postal workers delaying letters, data clerks swapping ID tags. A few names went missing from the master databases. But the aliens adapted fast. They deployed scanning towers, Tall rods that rose silently from underground, appearing overnight like weeds. Each tower was unmarked and featureless, but anyone walking within range experienced a flicker in vision, a prickle behind the eyes followed by a message on their device. Your profile has been logged. Thank you for compliance. People stopped walking near the towers. They stopped walking, period. Inside embassy perimeter zones, the atmosphere changed subtly. Trees wilted and regrew with leaves the wrong color. Insects no longer obeyed light. Stray animals disappeared entirely. The area around the alien structure became wrong, not visibly hostile but stranger by the day. Satellite photos revealed changes outside the US too. A mountainside in Kyrgyzstan now housed concentric circular clearings never there before. A region in the Amazon had gone radio silent after drone overflights. In Western Australia, mining sensors picked up subterranean heat blooms that formed perfect hexagonal grids. The embassy was just the beginning. Now there were nodes. Rhys McCallum reviewed the reports from a reinforced command site beneath Andrews Air Force Base. He no longer wore a tie. His eyes were bloodshot. Next to him, Dr. Fawzi of the Global Human Biometric Council ran a finger down a printout. They're not selecting for strength, she muttered. Not intelligence. It's nutrient profile. Organ compatibility. Biochemical rarity. We're not being evaluated. We're being sorted. Rhys stared at a redacted file. It had just one sentence beneath the code. Quota window, 91 days. Planetary cap, 3.2 million units. He folded the file closed and exhaled slowly through his teeth. The countdown had started. And Earth, it seemed, was already behind schedule. The fog rolled in like a blanket of ash, dry and unnaturally slow. It settled over the valley near the Rockies, blanketing the treetops, the river, and the remnants of what used to be a town called Ember Creek. Nothing remained of the diner, the elementary school, or the hardware store. All of it had been torn out by machines with no names, tracked vehicles with pincer arms and vents that hissed blue vapor. In their place stood a dome. From a satellite's eye, the structure resembled a soft blister, white, with barely visible seams that shifted each day. The terrain around it was scorched flat and lined with evenly spaced towers. Inside the dome, thermal scans were unreadable. The internal heat signature pulsed in ways that did not align with any known machinery or biological process. Locals who tried to approach never made it close. 2 hikers disappeared from a ridge above the western perimeter. A ranger's dashcam flickered and died near the southern boundary, showing only a glimpse of something vast and moving beneath the dome's surface. Tubes like tendons dragging something heavy. Elsewhere, other zones began to match Ember Creek's fate. In Finland, a lakeside village was evacuated with no explanation. In Namibia, a tourist camp vanished overnight, leaving behind tents but no footprints. In southern Argentina, grazing fields were replaced by gray-bark towers that pulsed when touched. The coordinators never addressed any of it directly. They simply issued updates. Polished statements devoid of emotion. Production capacity must increase. Regional adaptation in progress. Human compliance critical. Back in D.C., Rhys McCallum stared at the projection screen inside the decommissioned metro tunnel beneath L Street. The war room, if it could be called that, had been patched together with cables and discarded terminals, remnants of agencies that had already folded or fled. We have a drone inside one of the domes, said Kira Hahn, a resistance tech who'd once worked for NASA. She tapped a keyboard. The screen flickered, then steadied. The footage was dim, filtered through interference. But it showed movement, corridors of living tissue, not built but grown. Pulses of pale light traveled through the floor like blood under skin. Shapes hung from the ceiling, suspended in jelly-like sacs. Some twitched. Some didn't. One sac tore open on screen. A human body fell from it, limp, head twisted, skin grayed. In the distance, machines advanced. Not mechanical in the traditional sense. They dragged themselves forward with parts that looked forged from muscle and wire. They collected the body. Rolled it onto a platform. Sprayed it down with something that foamed. Then dragged it out of view. No sound. No screaming. Just process. 30 seconds later, Kira said, We lost the drone. Reese remained still. Across the room, two former data brokers stared at regional maps. They're not just farming humans. They're filtering us. Setting up collection points along high-density routes. Look, every location aligns with a major water source and transport corridor. They're thinking in bulk, Reese murmured. They're not taking individuals. They're managing flow. The room was quiet, except for the hum of recycled air and the soft buzz of an old monitor struggling to stay lit. Why the fog? Someone asked from the back. Kira answered without looking up. It keeps people away. Messes with electronics. But I think it's more than that. I think the fog's alive. It learns. I ran chemical traces. Whatever it is, it's adapting to our immune systems. Reese stared at the screen. The drone's final image, a conveyor of human limbs being lowered into a tank, flickered again before cutting out. He looked away. Outside, another town disappeared. And the farms kept growing. They weren't soldiers, not officially. Not anymore. The group that called themselves the Scattered didn't carry flags or wear insignias. Most of them had been dismissed from service, rejected by institutions, or driven underground by the sorting codes. Engineers, smugglers, biologists, hunters. Anyone with skills, and something to lose. They had no central command. No standing army. But they had memory. And they had rage. And they had proof. The raid was planned for 4 days. Kira had located a transmission node embedded in a rewilded zone north of Bozeman, an area scrubbed from recent maps. Drone overflights showed nothing. But on thermal imaging, something massive pulsed beneath the soil. Movement too rhythmic to be natural. Under cloud cover, a convoy of repurposed transport vans moved across dirt roads, headlights taped, engines muffled. The Scattered had retrofitted each vehicle with signal scramblers, scavenged from pre-collapsed telecom gear. They carried EMP darts, coilguns, and non-standard oxygen masks. All things the coordinators hadn't encountered when Earth still had rules. At the front of the column sat Reese, armor mismatched, hair grayer than last month. He'd stopped shaving. Across from him, an old merc named Holland loaded cartridges into a sidearm built from scrap parts and surgical steel. You ever think about how fast we became prey? Holland muttered. Every hour, Reese said. The others didn't talk. When they reached the forest line, the fog had already begun to rise. Not thick enough to block sight, just enough to make the world feel off. Plants near the tree line curved subtly inward, as if drawn toward something underground. The team split. Reese led the forward group through a depression in the terrain, approaching a grove where barkless trees stood in uniform rows. Beneath them, the ground flexed ever so slightly, like lungs beneath moss. No birds. No bugs. The silence wasn't natural. It was curated. They reached the access sink without incident. A thin crack in the soil, shaped like a spiral. Heat bled from it. Kira dropped a sensor node. This isn't a vent. It's a respiratory system. Whatever's down there, it's not just alive. It regulates. She tossed a device into the crack. It unfolded mid-fall, transmitting footage to her slate. The chamber below was massive. Stacks of humans, unconscious, their bodies encased in ribbed exoskin. Feeding tubes. Pulsing veins running to the ceiling. Dozens of bodies per tier, all being processed by machines that resembled centipedes made of tubing and chrome bone. One of them turned toward the camera. It had no eyes. No face. But it paused. Then the signal went dark. Blow it, Reese said, standing. No time to map the route, Kira warned. We're guessing. Might not hit anything useful. He nodded. Doesn't matter. They need to know we're not inventory. The charges were placed fast. 3 minutes later, the ground ruptured with a muted thud. The dome buckled. Slurry sprayed up like thick rain. But it didn't scream. It didn't react like a wounded animal. It just rerouted. From the nearby ridge, Holland cursed. They're compensating. Redistributing load. Back at the access sink, new tendrils began to emerge, long ribbed appendages, tipped with fanged openings and lined with metallic spines. The team opened fire. Bullets tore into them, but the tendrils didn't die. They stiffened, spasmed, then turned. One of the scattered was snatched off the ground, vanished into the opening before he could scream. Reese shouted for retreat, pulling Kira backward as the access sink collapsed into a fleshy whirlpool. They made it out with 5 fewer than they arrived. But the data was secure. The footage survived. By morning it was already circulating through dark networks and whisper hubs. The world finally saw what was inside a feed farm. For many it was the first time they believed. For the coordinators it was the first time they responded. That same evening 10 more towns lost contact. The teeth of the resistance had drawn blood. But the harvest was far from over. By now the embassy no longer looked like a building. It breathed visibly. Each expansion of its outer shell caused ripples across the surface, like wind on disturbed water. The structure had doubled in height and spread, stretching across the National Mall like a fungal sprawl too large to quarantine. Portions of it had grown translucent, revealing interior layers that squirmed in patterns no one had decoded. Dozens of ground-to-air towers now ringed it. They hummed with unreadable signals, carving out a radius where physics no longer cooperated. Sound curved. Metal warped. Drones malfunctioned the moment they crossed the perimeter. Inside that zone the air had a taste. Like static and dry metal. The scattered didn't care. They had a window, just 5 minutes, thanks to a blackout orchestrated by ex-satellite engineers who turned the orbital network against its handlers. Power cut. Comms scrambled. Surveillance blind. For 5 minutes they had a hole. Reese entered first, wrapped in a full environment rig stitched from scavenged aerospace gear. He carried a signal disruptor designed to confuse the organic sensors lining the embassy's base. Behind him, Kira carried the canisters, 2 cylinders of nerve-binding gas calibrated for multi-phylum use. And behind her, 3 others moved in a tight column, silent and ready. They made it through the outer membrane. It didn't open. It absorbed. The wall puckered inward around them and pulled. For 4 seconds they were weightless. Then the floor reappeared beneath their boots. They were inside. The interior was no less alien than its exterior. The walls shimmered, not with light but with bioluminescent thought. Patterns of information flickered across surfaces, loops of pulsing glyphs that rearranged themselves based on the team's movements. "This place is learning," Kira said, voice tight over comms. "It's mapping us in real time." "Then don't slow down," Reese answered. They moved through a passage that narrowed with every step. What started as a corridor became a throat. The surfaces grew moist. Pulses echoed through their boots. Then came the first encounter. It wasn't a coordinator, not like the one seen outside. This thing was smaller. Quadruped. Translucent. Its skin was laced with internal wires, its limbs barely attached by strands of sinew and some kind of clear gel. It moved sideways, not forward. Its head, or what might have been one, tilted without axis. Kira fired. The creature collapsed, bursting into steam and string. The passage darkened. Reese grabbed the lead and pushed forward, ignoring the fluid seeping into his gloves. Every second counted. The countdown on his forearm glowed yellow. 2:43. They reached the heart of it, the processing nerve cluster. A spherical chamber 30 meters across, with a central core suspended like a brain in mid-exhale. Tubes ran from the ceiling, walls and floor into it. Human forms could be seen inside the translucent veins, some unconscious, others twitching. The noise in their helmets rose. "Scramble's failing," Kira said, pressing her glove to the disruptor. Reese opened his bag and pulled the charge pack. 3 presses. 1 rotation. 1 grip switch. He handed the detonator to Kira and crossed to the core. "Give me 60 seconds. The rest stood guard as he approached the nerve column. The moment he touched the base, the entire structure convulsed. Not a quake. A rejection. Panels peeled back from the walls, revealing more creatures. Small ones, spindly, eyeless. They moved in spirals, too fast to shoot cleanly. One of the scattered screamed and was yanked backward, headfirst into the ceiling. 40 seconds. Kira shouted. Reese pushed the charge into the core. It sank deeper than expected, as though being inhaled. Lights flared across the walls. The core started speaking. Not words. Not sound. Images. Projected straight into Rhesus cortex. Visions of other worlds, supply chains, feeding platforms orbiting broken planets. He saw conveyor moons. Human-shaped silhouettes torn open in ritualized rows. Consumption as ceremony. Efficiency as divinity. He bit down hard on his tongue and forced the signal out. Now. Kira hit the detonator. The world didn't explode. It folded. The team was thrown back as space inside the embassy collapsed inward. Walls screamed, not audibly but in pressure waves. One member's helmet cracked. Another was impaled by a recoiling conduit. Kira dragged Reese out by his harness. The walls tried to hold them, pulsing with suction, releasing only as the disruptor pack overloaded. They escaped through a side channel, rupturing through what might have been a stomach wall. Outside, the embassy's glow dimmed. News stations scrambled to interpret the footage. The public saw it sag, saw the towers around it go dark, saw the surface fracture like cracked porcelain. But it didn't fall. And by dawn, it had sealed every breach. The attack had not gone unnoticed. Within 24 hours, 4 more farms expanded by 30%. By the end of the week, no one with a green classification could be found. The embassy had healed. But it had remembered. The coordinators changed their diet. Until now, their selections had been practical, based on yield, chemistry, and resistance to spoilage. The harvest system had been clean, clinical. But after the embassy breach, everything shifted. The new priority wasn't nutrition. It was sensation. Reports came in from resistance cells scattered across what was left of the eastern grid. A convoy in what used to be Ohio was intercepted by drones that didn't extract blood work or scan tissue. Instead, they took neural readings, brainwave activity, emotional spikes, fear thresholds. Pain preference profiling, Kira muttered, poring over a cracked data slate. They're no longer just processing us. They're learning to taste. Reese leaned against the wall of the tunnel. His left arm was still wrapped in bio-bandages from the embassy strike. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The implications were clear. This wasn't farming anymore. It was refinement. The display was streamed directly to the planetary network. No encryption. No firewalls. Just a single feed, wide-angle, dimly lit, showing a human suspended in a column of amber fluid. Tubes ran from his spine, throat, and wrists. Behind him, alien figures, taller, more decorated than the coordinators seen before, watched in slow, deliberate stillness. One figure approached. It bore no face, only a shifting lattice of tendrils that twisted into temporary features, a parody of human expression. It extended an appendage into the fluid and began pulling something from the man's body. Not flesh. Emotion. The display flickered, as if translating sensations into digestible data. On-screen text scrolled by an alien script. Underneath it, a translation bar offered English terms. Panic, unfiltered. Grief, mild. Memory of kin, strong. Acceptable vintage. Package, premium reserve. The stream ended after 2 minutes. It reappeared every 4 hours on loop. Even black site networks couldn't block it. The coordinators weren't just warning Earth anymore. They were advertising. At the edge of what used to be northern Nevada, the resistance prepared its final gambit. It wasn't a missile. Not an attack. It was a virus. Dr. Fozzie, now ghost-listed and hunted across 3 continents, had spent the last 2 months in a bunker beneath a decommissioned salt mine. Her team had crafted something rare, a gene-encoded neurotoxin that wasn't lethal to humans, but became corrosive in the digestive systems of the coordinators and their kind. They called it disharmony. It was elegant, slow-acting, and tailored to spread via ingestion. They only needed one subject to be processed. One. Reese volunteered. He didn't consult anyone. He simply injected the pathogen into the base of his neck, walked across the desert in broad daylight, and waited until the drones came. They took him without resistance. Inside the nearest farm, Unit 14 Delta, he was sorted, scanned, indexed. Labeled exotic. His emotional profile flagged him as an elite offering. A delicacy. He was presented in a consumption chamber 3 days later. And when the first coordinator fed, it didn't notice the change. Not at first. Then came the rupture. Its feeding membrane collapsed. Its neural fibers spasmed. It convulsed, spraying half-digested fluids across the chamber walls. Others rushed in, but the reaction spread, through shared ingestion paths, neural loops, nutrient-sharing tunnels. Within hours, 14 delta shut down. Then 3 more. The chain had begun. In the ruins of a radio tower, Kira received the ping. It was just one word, buried in a string of corrupted transmissions, but unmistakable. Bloom. She smiled for the first time in weeks. Because now Earth wasn't just prey. It was poisonous.